Welcome to the third and final part of the Chapter 18 Flipped Classroom. In this section, we'll review what was happening with the Swahili city-states, which are located on the east coast of Africa. We learned about them when we did the Indian Ocean Basin, so this should be a review. So starting with the cities that were most prominent in the city-states, Mogadishu, Lamu, Mombasa, Zanzibar, Mozambique, Sofala, and Kilwa. And you'll be putting a couple of those different locations on your map, which will help you see how they ran along the entire east coast of Africa. These cities were extremely wealthy and extremely important in trade because of the different materials that they had to export. They were exporting things like ivory, gold, and like animal skins, such as zebra or hippo, things like that. Like kind of exotic animals. There was a very large trade of those in the Indian Ocean Basin. But the biggest thing that they exported was slaves. From 600 to 1450, over 10 million Africans were exported from the east coast of Africa. And typically, we usually think of the slave trade as happening on the west coast, but this shows that it was already happening on the east coast. In terms of imported goods, they were importing lots of different things from the Dar al-Islam. So this included crops like sugar, coffee, bananas, as well as spices, porcelain from China, silk, and just all those typical big goods that you would think of with the Indian Ocean Basin. Arab merchants were really in charge of this trade, and they were working with interior kingdoms, like Great Zimbabwe, to get materials to trade. Because of the monsoon winds, Arab merchants typically lived in Africa, East Africa, for about 6 months out of the year. So they really started families there. They built mosques. And as you're going to see, it was very important to, in terms of social status, to show off your Arab heritage. That played a big role in social status. So, like I mentioned, Great Zimbabwe and other interior kingdoms played a big role in procuring materials for this trade. So without them, the Swahili city-states would not have been as prosperous as they were. Really, the Swahili were kind of like middlemen. But because they were part of the Dar al-Islam, they were able to really benefit from this trade. All right, so in the last slide I mentioned slavery. Slavery had a huge role in the Arab states, mainly on plantations. It'd help if I spelled plantation right? And this was mainly in Iraq. And over this time period, like 1750 to 1500, but around the same time, 10 million people were shipped from Africa to the Arab states. And this resulted in a massive amount of slaves living in the Abbasid Empire. And one of the most well-documented slave revolts, although this wasn't a successful slave revolt, it was successful for a great time, occurred in the Abbasid Empire. It was called the Zanj Revolt, or the Zanj Rebellion, and it took place from 869 to 883 CE. So that's a pretty long period of rebellion, which shows you just how successful it was. These were mainly agricultural workers who were working on plantations in really difficult environments. And because of this, they massed a rebellion. This was during a very weak time in the Abbasid Empire. There had been an issue with succession, as we're going to learn about later on in history. There often is. So the Abbasid Empire took a really long time to recover from this. And this is one of their weak points. So although eventually they did put down the rebellion, it was very difficult for them to do so. And they basically were waging a guerrilla war um, on the opposite empire. They raided towns, villages, enemy camps. Um, Unfortunately, we don't know in like our history classes too much about the Zand Revolt. We don't talk about it very much. We talk more about the Haitian Revolt. This is because most of the sources for the Zand Revolt are in Arabic, but Wikipedia has a really good site on this. And if you look up, I mean, if you just Google Zand Rebellion, it's quite fascinating. So don't forget to do the flip class, or excuse me, the listening check when you're done with this flip classroom, and have a wonderful day.